Chapter 47. The tournament begins. "Good morning to His Majesty and the lovely citizens of the Ashbourne Kingdom," yelled a man dressed in a silver vest with slicked black dark hair. Standing in the center of the arena, he did a twirl to the audience before finally facing the king's booth. His voice projected all over, clear and loud. Kai suspected it was some kind of sound magic, but it wasn't harmful at all. "It is my pleasure to welcome everyone to the annual Ashbourne Academy tournament," the announcer roared. "I am your host, Kenny Valentine." Kai, like all the other students of the Ashbourne Academy, were waiting in the basement area of the arena. It was not underground, but located at ground level. The entire basement encircled the circular arena. Windows allowed the students to see directly into the field of battle. The area was large enough for the students to be spread out underneath and not bump into others. Above the basement, the audience sat in stadium seating, leading up for hundreds of feet. Above the basement, the king sat comfortably in an ornate high-backed chair. He looked like a man well past his prime, appearing slightly younger than Professor Dravenport. True to his nickname, the Ash Monarch, he was outfitted in a grey robe, complementing his grey hair and eyes. Beautiful silver inscriptions highlighted the robe that seemed to pulse with life with every breath the monarch took. His eyes scanned all over and eventually settled on Nicholas, who was standing at the window next to Kai. So that's Nicholas's father. If the rumors were true and the king was one of those original humans from Earth, then that would make him about 1,300 years old. To his left and right were middle-aged humans with similar features. Could they be Nicholas's older brothers? It was difficult to tell who the children and parents in some families were when a parent could easily outlive his children and even appear younger if he had attained a higher realm than his offspring. The entire arena was filled to capacity. Kai couldn't even begin to guess how many people were sitting, but it certainly was daunting to think about performing and fighting under the scrutiny of so many people. Instead of sitting at the window and waiting for the tournament to start, Nicholas went off to meditate in the back of the room. He didn't care to watch the spectacle in front of them. Kai figured this wasn't his first time attending an event like this, but he guessed it would be his first time participating in it. As always, we've kept the brackets and who is facing who a secret, so no one student has the advantage in their matches. The matches called will be randomized, so you will never know who your next opponent is until the finals. Now on to the boring stuff, but it must be said for liability purposes. The announcer began repeating the rules aloud for the entire stadium to hear. Nothing was different from what Sven had said. If you don't hear your name called today or tomorrow, then you have a tournament bye for round 1. To start the day, we will begin with the first-year students. When you hear your name called, please enter the arena. Jesse Clinetro and Maverick Douglas. Many of the first years began turning their heads to watch 2 students proceed out of the doors and into the arena. Human Foundation Level 76. Human Foundation Level 55. Most would guess that the higher-leveled person would win, but Kai wasn't so sure. Jessie appeared calm and collected as she walked ahead of Maverick. Meanwhile, Maverick was sweating bullets. He looked visibly sick as gripped the handle of his sword fiercely in his sheath. The poor kid looked pale. Fighting in general was one thing, but fighting in front of an audience of 10,000 or more was another, especially when your family and everyone you knew would be there, watching. If you lost to someone lower level than yourself, you would bring shame to yourself and your family. Knocking an arrow on her bow, Jessie stared indifferently at her opponent from the center of the arena. Her bow was aimed down near her feet in a relaxed manner. The entire audience waited for the announcer's next words. "Begin," he roared. Pulling her bow up, she let a green arrow fly before her opponent could even make it a quarter of the way to her. Maverick's shield came up, blocking the arrow. Instead of the arrow ricocheting and bouncing away, it stuck to the shield. Vines and roots sprouted from the tiny arrowhead, instantly covering the shield. The vines crawled around the edge of the shield and began whipping at Maverick, who flinched as they bashed against his armor. The vines seemed to stop growing after a meter length. Maverick slashed at the vines, chopping part of them off, only for the vines to regrow back to the same length. Distracted, another arrow flew and attached to Maverick's leg. The arrow broke apart again, splitting into multiple vines that wrapped around Maverick's leg. Instead of attacking him, the ends shot into the ground and tightened. Screaming in pain, Maverick slashed down, cutting apart the vines connecting to the ground. Just as he was finally going to move, another arrow connected to his other leg, with the vines doing the same as before. It was obvious the swordsman was growing frustrated and tired. Whereas Jessie was calmly standing in the same place, with an arrow in her bow at the ready. But instead of firing it, she simply watched Maverick struggle to escape the vines. A small smile came to her face as the vines kept growing from the source and trapping the poor swordsman. No matter how many times he cut at the vines, they kept coming back. After 2 minutes of watching the fiasco, Jessie pulled her bow up and quickly shot it. This time the arrow connected to Maverick's forehead. But it didn't pierce through, it simply stuck on. Immediately following its connection, it spouted vines that wrapped around his head. Dropping his sword and shield, he tugged at the vines and arrow, but they remained firmly attached. Kai could tell panic had overtaken the swordsman as he was probably struggling to breathe underneath the vines. "Winner, Jessie." The announcer called the round when nothing changed except more flailing by Maverick. Upon the announcement, the vines slinked back and withdrew into the green arrows. Once the vines were gone, the arrows popped off Maverick's body. Whatever had kept them attached was gone. Face free of obstructions, Maverick looked distraught. He hadn't been able to show anything during the fight and had been the first to be eliminated. As far as the audience was concerned, Maverick had failed epically. Now a new pressure had descended upon all the students to at least look good, or look better than Maverick even if they ended up losing. Maverick returned with his head hung. He appeared completely unharmed, a testament to Jessie's control and magic that seemed perfect for the competition. It looked as if she had effortlessly controlled the entire battle and her opponent, even toying with him. What an exciting fight. Congratulations to the cool and calm Jessie. An effortless win for the first match of the tournament, Kenny announced. Will Louis Febrel and Daniel Singer join us in the arena? Human Foundation Level 34. Human Foundation Level 68. Kai was a bit surprised that someone would be so low-leveled even after a full year at the academy. It was impossible to tell what each fighter was feeling as they entered the arena. Both were wearing armor and helmets, making it impossible to see their faces. Kai didn't know of Louis, but he knew Danielle briefly. The young fighter was known in the melee class for being punishing to his opponents. No one liked to spar with him unless they were certain they would win. Daniel would take it too far and hurt his opponents. He had a mean streak that everyone would probably get to see in this fight. He had never had the opportunity to fight against Daniel, as the man never moved out of Group B in melee training. Begin! Daniel dashed across the field. Even 30 levels lower than Kai, he was unquestionably faster. His opponent Louis stood still, only his hands moved in circular patterns as water was conjured between them. Water continued to gather as Daniel got closer. When they were only meters apart, the giant ball of water that had reached a meter across shot out of Louis's hands. People in the audience stood at what happened next. Deftly dodging the ball of water, Daniel came face to face with the unarmed Louis. The spiked club in Daniel's hand swung across and bashed the slow-reacting Louis in the side of the head. Instantly he collapsed, but that didn't stop Daniel, who swung again, fight into the fallen mage's side. Winner Daniel Singer. Either not caring or not hearing the announcer, Daniel swung again into the unconscious mage. It was only when an adjudicator teleported onto the field and grabbed Daniel's arm that he stopped. There was a momentary pause where the adjudicator was saying something to Daniel, while healers had simultaneously found themselves onto the field treating Louis. After letting go of Daniel's arm, the adjudicator vanished, and Daniel walked back to where the students were located. Entering through the door to Kai's right, everyone gave him wide berth as he returned and sat down on one of the benches. Kai watched on as 2 minutes later, Louis stood up. The side of his metal helmet was dented partially. One of the healers helped Louis across the field into the staff area of the basement, where he was likely to receive more treatment. The next couple of matches were lackluster. The quickest fight had been between one person in the Forging realm and someone level 50 in the Foundation realm. He had no chance, as the Foundation realm kid was knocked out before he could even activate his magic. A few students were announced with byes, automatically winning their first round just to fill the tournament bracket. On the first day, only 2 people in the forging realm ended up fighting among the first years. Both fights were quick and uneventful and did not provide Kai with any insights. Kai's name was never called as the second-year students began their fighting 4 hours into the day. Kai never heard his name called for a bye or a fight. He figured he would find out tomorrow or the next day if he was fighting or not. Either way, he was ready. A warrior was ready to battle at any time. The second-year fights weren't much different than the first. There was still a mix between Foundation and Forging Realm students, but the fights tended to be more even or longer in most cases. The truly interesting fights were when the third-year students began. Kai watched with rapt attention. Would Christopher Reed and Alistair Silver please join us on the field? There was a sudden buzz and excitement in the air that couldn't compare to the previous matches. To the side, Kai heard, "Alistair has almost reached the 3rd realm. He is incredible. No wonder he won the tournament both years prior. No one else in his year can compare." Human Forging level 56. Human Forging level 97. Kai recognized the higher-level student. Although he didn't remember if he ever got the person's name, he recognized the face. It was the student he had almost decapitated when his sword went flying during training so many months ago. The Earth Mage had been a companion of sorts on the training field. They had never really interacted after the first encounter, merely giving each other nods or waves as they kept to themselves in their training. Who knew the student was the former champion for both first and second-year students? Part of Kai wondered if it was his higher level or his skill at fighting that enabled him to win. Either way, people around him were hyped up for the upcoming fight. The audience had gone silent moments before the battle began. It was strange compared to the previous hours of fighting. Respect seemed to be given to these fighters, or maybe to Alistair. The first move was made by Christopher as a torrent of flames travelled out of his hand towards Alistair. Rocks ripped out of the ground, some were launched at Christopher, while one large flat rock made itself a shield in front of Alistair. The flames crashed into the shield rock, which began spinning round and round, causing the flames to shoot off to the side of the rock. Stopping his flame attack, Christopher took to the sky as he dodged the incoming rock projectiles. He seemed to run on the air as fire spread out in a small circular disc, formed under every step he took. Arcing through the sky, he deftly dodged the rocks being thrown at him. Meanwhile, he responded in kind with his own blasts of fire. Kai was impressed. The fighter was doing well, multitasking, dodging, and throwing spells, something none of the first years had shown. The fight was settled a few minutes later when a rock slammed into Christopher. Falling from the sky, a hand made of rock grew out of the ground, catching the fire mage. Grasped in rock hand, Christopher announced, "I surrender," aloud. Cheers rang out as he was instantly released from his constraint. The 2 fighters shook hands and even walked back to the third-year waiting area together, animatedly discussing something. After the fight, Kai realized that, like Jesse, Alistair had never even moved from his spot. In fact, the Earth Mage had never even taken his hands from his pockets.